Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a new report on which jobs within the military come with the most risk of suicide. Hear about which occupations have the highest rates. Also, a Marine veteran who lost his arm in an IED explosion is developing innovative prosthetics to help fellow vets with limb injuries. Learn about StumpWorks. Plus, we're on the floor at this year's Space and Missile Defense Symposium. Have a look at highlights from the annual conference. Finally, the story of a Coast Guard rescue in Alaska. Hear from the pilot who helped rescue 2 people in northern waters. It's the latest in news and analysis, from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Pat Hansen. The issue of service member and veteran suicide is a long-standing problem for Pentagon and congressional leaders. In an effort to try to understand the issue better, the DoD recently performed a study to see which occupations in the military come with the highest risk of suicide. For an in-depth look at the study, we turn to reporter Jonathan Lehrfeld, who dug into the numbers.
The problem of suicide among military members and veterans has long been a focus for the Pentagon, Veterans Administration, and Congress. In an effort to try to understand the issue better, the Department of Defense last month unveiled a study that looked at what military jobs have the highest rates of suicide. The result? The report found that the jobs with elevated risk of suicide included roles in infantry, ordnance disposal and diving, combat engineering, medical care, and occupations for technical specialists not elsewhere classified. As the challenge of reducing suicide among the military community continues, lawmakers are hoping the report can facilitate constructive action. Senator Angus King of Maine, who sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee, said in a statement, "These key findings show trends that will guide the DoD in its effort to curb suicide rates and hopefully save lives." The report used data starting in 2011 through 2022 on nearly 6,000 military suicide deaths, because before that, the Pentagon did not have reliable information. Here's what the report found. Enlisted service members in infantry were found to have higher suicide mortality rates than those from 21 other occupation codes. That was followed by service members with job codes for ordnance disposal and diving, combat engineering, medical care, and technical specialists not elsewhere classified. Additionally, 14 occupation codes had evidence of a higher suicide mortality rate as compared to the civilian U.S. adult population. Of those, the 3 with the highest adjusted rates were occupation codes in infantry, armor and amphibious, and combat engineering. U.S. population suicide data for those comparisons was available through 2021 at the time the report was authored. Meanwhile, enlisted troops with an occupation code for not occupationally qualified and for officer candidates and students had a lower suicide rate than 38 other occupation codes. Let's take a closer look at data on each of the services. In the Army, soldiers in occupation codes for infantry, combat engineering, and armament and munitions showed strong evidence of higher suicide mortality rates than the rate for the total enlisted Army population. But soldiers in other occupation codes like data processing, other functional support, and officer candidates and students had strong evidence of lower rates. Also, only the Army had occupation codes with enough data to make a comparison to the total Army officer suicide rate. Helicopter pilots and ground and naval arms had suicide rates consistent with that rate. In the Navy, only sailors in the occupation code for law enforcement had strong evidence of a higher suicide mortality rate than the total enlisted Navy rate. Marines in the occupation code for infantry had a higher suicide rate than the total enlisted Marine Corps rate, while those in the occupation code for not occupationally qualified had a lower rate. With the Air Force, all occupation codes had suicide mortality rates consistent with the total enlisted Air Force rate, except for those in the occupation code for not occupationally qualified, which had a lower rate. During the time reviewed, the Coast Guard experienced relatively low suicide death counts per year making a comparative analysis difficult. And established in 2019, the Space Force was excluded from the analysis since there were no deaths by suicide in the service between 2019 and 2022. For Military Times, I'm Jonathan Lehrfeld.
And now from Huntsville, Alabama. The annual Space and Missile Defense Symposium is a gathering place for many of the leading figures from the military and defense industry's upper echelons, all looking for better offensive and defensive capabilities in the skies. Defense News ground warfare reporter Jen Jetson was on the ground to get a look at the show floor. Here's some of what she found.
I'm Jen Jensen, land warfare reporter with Defense News here at the Space and Missile Defense Symposium in Huntsville, Alabama. Behind me is the expo floor here, and industry has come with many solutions for the future of air and missile defense. I think one of the key things I'm hearing from officials, both the U.S. Army and from the Missile Defense Agency, other officials, is integration is going to be very important going forward, given the threats that we're seeing, particularly if you look at attacks like we've seen from Iran into Israel. The amount of integration and coordination that takes from tracking all of those various threats coming in, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drone swarms. It's going to take so much to tie all of those capabilities together in order to defeat those types of things, in order to identify them as threats. So we're going to see a lot of solutions on the expo floor here that get after tying those things together, from tracking all the way to command and control to fire control capability. On a smaller scale, the U.S. Army and the Missile Defense Agency are working to tie the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System with the Patriot Air and Missile Defense System. Behind me is a THAAD interceptor as well as a PAC-3 MSE missile, and that's going to be really key in terms of being able to get after regional defense at greater ranges with better capability. Another key capability we're going to see on the expo floor here is hypersonic capability. Both the Missile Defense Agency and the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force are all working on both offensive and defensive hypersonic weapon capability. The U.S. Army is bringing their hypersonic glide body capability. It's a joint program with the U.S. Navy, and they will tie that together. The Navy will be launching it off of a ship. The Army will be launching it from a ground launcher. For the Missile Defense Agency, the Glide Phase Interceptor is a competition between RTX and Northrop Grumman to come up with an interceptor that can take out hypersonic weapons. That's a huge competition to watch. It's likely there'll be a down select soon. Other hypersonic technology would be focused on tracking capability. It's not easy to track a hypersonic threat in the air because of its maneuverability and its ability to evade radars that we have currently. Many companies are working on the ability to track that, including Northrop Grumman. They have launched their hypersonic and ballistic space sensor tracking capability. That was launched in February and is currently getting calibrated and will begin its operational testing. Countering drones, unmanned aircraft systems, is another huge challenge for the DoD, and it's a joint effort to try to come up with ways to do this. There's no silver bullet solution. Drone swarms are becoming larger and larger, and countering those capabilities is very challenging. Those threats are proliferating on the battlefield. We see it in Ukraine, and we've seen it in the Middle East as well. The Army is currently focused on cruise missile defense through its indirect fire protection capability, which is currently in a prototyping phase. The Army is about to start a competition for a second interceptor for the capability that is focused on cruise missile defense, particularly subsonic cruise missiles, which the first interceptor is not capable of taking out. Reporting from the Space and Missile Defense Symposium, I'm Jen Judson, Defense News.
When we return, a Marine veteran and amputee on a mission to make better prosthetics. Stay tuned for that story. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. After Marine veteran John Cunningham lost his right arm in an IED attack in 2005, he found himself looking for a better solution for a prosthetic that would support an active lifestyle. So instead of settling for prosthetic options that weren't suited to activities like rock climbing or cycling, he decided to take a different path and design his own, leveraging his twin degrees in biomedical and mechanical engineering. Cunningham is now the driving force behind StumpWorks, the company he created to develop new prosthetics for fellow amputees, making them out of the materials used in running shoes. For more about the effort, Military Times ground warfare editor Todd South recently spoke to Cunningham about the aptly named StumpWorks.
So John, I understand you served in the Marine Corps. Can you tell us a little about, why you joined and some about your service?
Sure. I joined the Marine Corps in 1997. We have a tradition of military and government service in my family, and I wanted to serve my country, and I wanted a leadership challenge, and I certainly got that. I got out early in 2000 and went back to school in the fall of 2000 to pursue graduate degrees in biomedical and mechanical engineering, and I joined a reserve combat engineer unit in Lynchburg, Virginia in 2004, and we got the warning order to activate within 48 hours of when I swore in. And so went to Iraq in August of 2004. I was the combat engineer officer and platoon commander for the combat engineer platoon, and I was injured on New Year's Day of 2005 in an IED attack.
So when you were injured in 2005, it was early on in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. There were more and more people dealing with amputee issues and prosthetic issues. So tell us a little about your early experiences with prosthetics and your early activities there, and then we can talk a little bit more about kind of what happened after that.
At that time, as now, there was a lot of press about how high-tech prosthetics were. Well, robotic hands are available. They are heavy, they are slow. They're not as capable as a hook, even though they look like a hand. Most arm amputees don't even wear a prosthetic arm, actually. And 9 of the top 10 reasons that they don't relate to fit and comfort, which is the socket or how it's attached to the body. So when I started thinking about what I wanted to do to try to change that myself, I ended up focusing on the socket, which is what led me to the business that I'm in now.
Tell us a little bit more about that eureka moment. Like, when was that? What were you doing? When were you saying, hey, maybe I can make some changes, tinker with this, and make some improvements either for myself or for others? I mean, tell us a little more about kind of how that all kind of started for you.
I became an engineer on the DARPA Revolutionizing Prosthetics project. I was the first test pilot for what they called the MPL that was designed at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. And it was actually my experience with that, wearing that arm with an uncomfortable socket that was really heavy to carry around, that finally led me to believe that maybe something more low tech could be done with existing technology. And that's when I got the idea to incorporate advanced athletic shoe materials into a socket. So instead of hard carbon fiber like Dutch wooden shoes, the idea was to make something that Nike or Adidas or New Balance might have made.
How did you know you kind of had the right mix of materials and fit to make an improvement?
It took a lot of work to find. I mean, this is the arm that we have right now, and all of this is 3D printed nylon, and it took us several years to find a 3D printing process that was strong enough to actually use on a daily basis.
Can you talk a little bit about from your work with, say, on your own, and then with DARPA, and then founding Stumpworks, and kind of what you guys are trying to do?
None of us like to be limited in our activities, and so having every possibility open to you is really important. Really, I'm just trying to transform and disrupt the prosthetics industry, to try to focus in on those top 10 reasons that people reject prosthetic arms.
So John, I understand there's some research going on right now that some could participate in. How might they do that?
Yeah, we've just started a research project with the Human Engineering Research Lab, the HURL at the VA at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and anybody who's interested who might qualify, we're transradial amputees below the elbow, can contact the patient recruiter at the HURL. Her name is Rosemary Cooper, and her email is COOPERRM at pitt.edu. The sooner you contact us, the better. You might end up in that initial group who gets to actually help with the development.
So John, you've got a great, educational engineering background and obviously some personal experience with this stuff, but there's a lot more to navigate. I understand you're working with some other folks on some of those other aspects of this kind of work.
Yeah, I've just begun participating in Semper Fi and America Fund's apprenticeship program, which matches me with an experienced entrepreneur and provides monetary support that we're looking to use to help build out our manufacturing capability. And that apprenticeship program is definitely something that any disabled military entrepreneurs ought to seek out if they can.
When we come back, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union has tips on what to consider before buying a car. Welcome back. You can hear it calling to you. That 2024 Dodge Charger on the lot nearby. But before you buy, have you thought it through? On this edition of Money Minute, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union has tips on what to consider before buying a car.
Auto dealers know military members lead unique lives and get paid differently than the general population. Most even offer military discounts and rebates on cars that sound great for your wallet. But before you dash off to the nearest dealer, it's a money-saving move to know exactly how much you can safely afford. Even if your housing and food is covered, it doesn't mean you can or should shell out more on your car payments. You've also got to pay for tags, tax, title, insurance, gas, and maintenance. It's a good idea to use one of the many online calculators to help estimate your max payment limit. Then check your credit. Your credit score can impact the interest rate you get on your loan. And bad credit can take your car payment right out of your comfort zone and put you in a loan for which you'll be paying interest well beyond the value of the car. So clean up or establish good credit, and when you're ready, get pre-approved with a trusted lender. This allows you to shop like a cash buyer. Also, learn the market value of cars you're interested in. Compare features using resources like TrueCar, Edmunds, or Kelley Blue Book. When you know your car, your max price, and payment, head to the dealer and tell them you're pre-approved so they'll know you're a serious buyer and you drive the bargains.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, align your radar to show you militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the most knowledgeable trooper on the parade ground, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning to bring you the most recent headlines. Lastly, if social media is where you find open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And until the government hits it with a tactical nuke, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. When we come back, a Coast Guardsman recounts a recent rescue in the cold waters of coastal Alaska. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Pat Hansen. In early July, Coast Guard Air Station Kodiak got a call about a capsized vessel in Alaskan waters and the need for immediate rescue assistance. Lieutenant Commander Catherine Cantu, an MH-60 helicopter pilot at the station, got the call and scrambled into action. The problem? The weather in the area was dangerously bad, and visibility was low. In a recently released interview, Lieutenant Commander Cantu talked about what it's like to work in the Coast Guard in Alaska, and what happened the day they set out to find two people in the nearby waters.
I moved to Alaska in the summer of 2022. I was immediately really excited to be here and do some of the incredible flying that we do, but also initially a little overwhelmed with just some of the challenges that are up here. Some of the amazing things about flying in Alaska are that you're going to fly in the most beautiful terrain that you would see, getting to cover the entire state of Alaska, flying through the mountains, which can be absolutely incredible. And we also have some very significant cases and missions that we do, since the Coast Guard is really one of the only agencies up here. We conduct different missions across the entire state of Alaska, and we do some of the most challenging flying that you can do. I was on duty on July 7th when we got a report that there was an overturned vessel and maybe some people in the water. So we immediately departed with our search and rescue crew, got airborne, and immediately realized that the weather was a lot worse than we expected. It took us longer to get on scene because we had to go a different route because of the bad weather. And once we got on scene, we realized that the visibility was only about 300 to maybe 400 yards. So we were orbiting over the area, trying to talk to vessels and call out to this boat, just while only really being able to see the water below us. When we got on scene, we were occupied with just making sure that the helicopter was in a safe flight path and not going to hit the mountainous terrain that was in the area. We created a racetrack pattern that was over water so that we could cover different portions of the water while we were looking directly beneath the helicopter as we overflew it. We were on scene searching for 30 or 40 minutes when we heard that Sector was talking directly to the survivor on his cell phone. So we asked if we could talk to the survivor as well, since the helicopter has the ability to make phone calls with our satellite phone. And Sector set up a three-way call where Sector Western Alaska, the survivor, and the helicopter were all on the phone together. So that allowed us to talk directly to the survivor and get more details about where he was. Having the survivors on the phone was able to tell us if we were getting closer or farther away. As he was on the phone with us, he was able to tell us that the helicopter was getting louder or quieter, which meant that we were maybe getting to the correct area. It was really powerful and a little emotional to hear one of the survivors' voices over the phone, knowing that there were actually two people in the water and that there was some urgency behind this case definitely was a significant impact as we were working to find them. As we were flying toward the position, the other pilot first saw an overturned vessel on her side of the aircraft, and then I saw a raft with two people in the water. So I immediately came into a hover right next to that raft so that we wouldn't lose sight of them in the fog. And once we were down in a hover, we were able to lower our rescue swimmer to the water, who swam over and then was able to hoist both of those survivors into the aircraft. When we landed at the air station with the two survivors, EMS was already waiting for us on scene, and they immediately started checking out those survivors and making sure they got the medical care that they needed. This case was really unique because not only was the weather really challenging, but it also had a lot of different aspects to it, and the command center worked really hard to make sure that they got in direct comms with the survivors and we were able to find them. I love flying and standing search and rescue in the state of Alaska, and I'm really proud of this crew for coming together to save two lives.
Thanks to Petty Officer First Class Shannon Kearney for that interview. And that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.